This is the CitizenLink Report.
If you find our insights helpful, would you support our video efforts? Your gift of $25 or more goes a long ways. Covers the crew, lights, cameras, all that. Just click on Donate. Thanks from all of us. She was placed on the Supreme Court by President Obama, but recently she's been instrumental in court actions favorable to religious freedom and to marriage. What's going on with Sonia Sotomayor? This is the CitizenLink Report. I'm Stuart Shepard, along with Bruce Hausknecht, who follows the courts for Focus on the Family. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Stuart.
First, let's talk about the court cases that set this up. The first one's out of Utah.
Right. This is what I would call a same-sex marriage case where some couples want to get married who are of the same gender, and so they try to do it, they're refused, and so they sue the state. And Utah, of course, has a marriage amendment defining marriage as one man and one woman. They sued earlier this year, and in December, about the third week of December, a federal district court judge in Utah declared the Utah marriage amendment unconstitutional.
Voted on by the people, put into place, torn down by a federal judge.
Yes, and in one order, and basically he said marriages can go on, same-sex marriages can begin immediately. Now, the state of Utah asked the judge to temporarily stop it while they appealed, which is a typical procedure. It's called requesting a stay, because they're going to obviously appeal that decision to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Denver.
And it changes hundreds of years of established law.
Well, yes, hundreds of U.S. law, years and thousands of years in terms of marriage throughout the world. And in one afternoon, a federal district court turns that all upside down, and people are running to the county clerks for marriage licenses.
So that's the background on that one. The other one involves a group of nuns known as the Little Sisters of the Poor. Tell us about that one.
It's a nonprofit ministry operated here in Colorado, run by Catholic nuns. They filed suit as part of the 90-plus lawsuits filed against the HHS mandate, which is that birth control, contraceptive, possible abortion-inducing drugs that have to be included in employer health plans.
Under Obamacare.
Under Obamacare. And this lawsuit was brought because this ministry of Catholic nuns, obviously adhering to Catholic doctrine, does not believe in either abortion or contraception. And they said, we don't want to participate in this, so give us relief from that. And so they had filed suit earlier, and a judge just a couple of weeks ago said no. And said no injunction. The law was supposed to take effect, or is supposed to take effect January 1. That's why a lot of these ministries were in a hurry-up mode to get it challenged, get an injunction.
So that's the background for both these. Now, the Little Sisters of the Poor case, it's more complicated, and there's a lot more going on there, but we'll leave it at the basic facts for this particular conversation. How does this intersect with a Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor? How does she get involved in these cases?
Well, it's an interesting quirk of federal procedure that maybe most viewers aren't familiar with, but each of the U.S. Supreme Court justices also is in charge of emergency motions that come out of the various circuits. There are 11 federal circuits, and the 10th Circuit, which Utah is part of and Colorado is a part of, is overseen by Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Which is to say that each of the Supreme Court justices watches over a region of the country, if you will, for any emergency appeals that come up to that level.
Right, that's exactly right. And when they get these emergency motions, they're generally very small. They're not asked to decide an entire case. They're very small in terms of focus and the issue, and they can say yay or nay, or they can ask the full Supreme Court to get involved in helping her decide that issue.
And they're supposed to be, and in this case, I think you can see in both these cases, they are items that need to be dealt with quickly. It has to be dealt with in a very timely fashion, or something bad will happen.
Yes, because what happened in both cases is Utah went to the 10th Circuit for a stay, a request to immediately stop that order in order to stop the same-sex marriages, as well as the Little Sisters of the Poor. When they lost at a federal district court level, they went immediately to the 10th Circuit and asked for a stay and were denied, all on New Year's Eve. And then they filed with the Supreme Court that same day, New Year's Eve.
Which goes to Justice Sotomayor.
Which went to Justice Sotomayor.
So, on the Little Sisters of the Poor case, Sotomayor said,
she said, I will stop the enforcement of the HHS mandate against your ministry while I request briefing, meaning legal argument, from the Department of Justice as to why I should or shouldn't give this stay. And so that was done. Last Friday was the deadline for the Department of Justice to submit briefs, and now we're waiting.
And we saw quite a few headlines about that Sotomayor acted in a way that was favorable toward the religious freedom of this group of nuns. In the marriage case, it was a little more complicated what she did. Explain that.
Well, in the marriage case, she also said, look, I need more time here, so I will require briefing and from the plaintiffs in that case, and in the meantime, I will grant. She said, in the meantime, I will refer this issue to the full court.
Right.
So she got all of her brothers and sisters on the court involved. They accepted the briefing from both sides, and just yesterday granted the stay that should have been granted by the district court judge in Utah all along.
And my understanding is it came to the Supreme Court in the morning. She referred it to the full court, and by that afternoon they issued this very short, very terse statement, but it basically smacked down the district judge and said, that's not how you do this.
Yes. It all happens very quickly, and it was a no-brainer even for the justices, because when you are upsetting the apple cart and changing hundreds of years of law on marriage overnight, you're creating same-sex marriages that are going to themselves become entitled to certain privileges, rights, and benefits under the state and federal laws. And that should never be done without further thought and further appellate review.
So here we have two cases. One involves religious freedom. One involves marriage and the definition of marriage, going to a person who was placed on the U.S. Supreme Court by President Obama. And she is known as someone who would be on the liberal wing of the court on social issues, and also someone who would see the court in a more activist role as establishing what the Constitution means as we go along as a living document. Both of these we would have thought would have gone the other way with her looking over these, but they didn't. What happened?
Well, this is what we find most interesting about these cases, because she does have a reputation as a liberal. Before she came on the court, she was known as suggesting, even if it was only half in jest, that the courts of appeals are the ones that make the policy around this country, meaning their decisions are so important that they change laws by themselves without the involvement of Congress or state legislatures. Yeah. So she has this track record of being a liberal and being in support of activist courts creating new law. And yet, in both of these cases, she did something that's considered fairly conservative, which is stopping the process, and in one case, getting the rest of the court involved. And so we have to give her some kudos for that.
And the difference here perhaps is these were not decisions made on the issue of the life issue. They weren't made on the life issue. They weren't made on the issue of the definition of marriage. They were made on the mechanics of the courts, if you will. And we forget sometimes, because we follow the social issues so closely at the Supreme Court, they deal with a lot of other things that are quite arcane, that deal with the nuances of law and all that. And the 9 of them may agree on more things than we think they do, because we always talk about that 5-4 split on social issues. These deal with how the courts run, and she appears to have come down on the right side of these.
That's a really good point, because this is a procedural issue. These actions should have been taken. Any reasonable person, lawyer, judge would tell you that this simply protects the status quo from being severely disrupted and parties harmed in the process. So it should be a no-brainer. And these judges, these justices, including Sonia Sotomayor, usually typically agree on the right thing to do in those procedural cases.
And we should point out the statement that came down from the Supreme Court on the marriage case. There were no dissents that were identified, which would suggest, perhaps, we don't know, that there was unanimity among the 9 justices that the district court was out of order, that they needed to straighten up.
Right. And anytime you get a unanimity on a case that is this controversial, you know that the unanimity was on a very minor procedural point where they can all agree because it's an easy question.
Okay, so I'm going to ask it straight up. Is Sonia Sotomayor suddenly becoming a conservative justice?
No, I don't think you have to fear that at all. I think she will remain a diehard liberal once these cases actually get before the Supreme Court.
All right. We will keep an eye on these cases as they go along and keep you informed about them. Bruce, thank you for your insights.
Thanks, Stuart.
And thank you for watching. We do appreciate you joining with us each week here. You may always write to us at mail@citizenlink.com. We do read every message that comes in. We don't always get to answer them all, but we do appreciate seeing your questions, your comments, your criticisms. We're open to all that. Just send it to mail@citizenlink.com. Remember to pray for all 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Pray that God would provide them with wisdom and insight as they make these crucial decisions about so many things that are in play around our country right now, so many issues that are going to see their final decision for the nation of the United States at the Supreme Court decided by those 9 human beings. And remember, stand tall and be heard.